everyone. Good afternoon and welcome to our webinar. This is the second part of the UOW Malaysia KDU Virtual Academic Series. And the series of webinar is actually a collaboration between the UOW Malaysia KDU Penang campus and the campus in Selangor. Being a part of the University of Wollongong Australia Global Network, we would like to share with the academic world what we at UOW Malaysia KDU have experienced and have used and have found to be useful. So today our topic is online assessments, challenges and possible solutions. My name is Michelle and I am the head of Department of Languages, and here with me today is my colleague, Mr. Lo Lian Lee. He is the head of Teaching and Learning Center at UOW Malaysia KDU Penang.
Hello everyone.
Right, before we begin, let's do some housekeeping. There are two sections for communication. One is the chat box and the other is the Q&A panel. So please post your questions in the Q&A panel. You can click on the right arrow just beside the word Q&A and the panel should drop down. So we will answer your questions at the end of the session as well as at the end of each issue that we'll highlight. Today we'll be looking at 7 issues in regard to moving assessments online. Right, without further ado, let's begin. I'm sure you all agree with me if I say that we are all going through a very challenging time now, learning to cope with the restrictions and also the new normal. While a lot of focus has been placed on moving and teaching and learning activities online at the very beginning of the movement restriction and lockdown, we have also wrestled with the challenges in assessing our students' learning. Some institutions have remained with the existing grading practices, while others have chosen the pass-fail structure, and some a combination of both. Well, no matter what the decision is, summative assessments of student learning remains very crucial and must be done. Traditionally, most of the summative assessments are carried out physically in a venue. However, at this time, due to the unprecedented circumstances, we have to obey to strict social distancing, and thus assessments have to be moved online. Now, when we say moving assessments online, it's not easy as just like turning a paper, an exam paper, into a digital format. We have to consider many issues such as the features of available platforms and also the mode of assessments. So generally, we can view online assessments from 2 perspectives. One is the synchronous and the other one is the asynchronous. So by what we mean synchronous is it happens in real time where all students take assessment at a fixed date or a time, much like a seated final exam, and it's usually 1 to 3 hours. While asynchronous assessment allows students to complete an assessment by the due date in a self-paced manner, and that usually can take from a few days to weeks. Now, undoubtedly that there are many challenges when we talk about online assessments, and today we'll be focusing on 7 main ones, as you can see on the slide here. Now let's look at the very first issue, academic misconduct. I think on the whole, this issue is the most critical, especially when we talk about synchronous assessment. This is because it's the lack of the proctor or invigilator. Without someone overseeing the attempting of the assessment, students can easily refer to textbooks, reference books, and obviously the internet for online resources. Students can just Google for answers, cut and paste the information they find, and submit that as their answer. Having said that, students can also communicate freely on their handphones with their friends, using WhatsApp, using WeChat, and whatever other platforms. They might even have someone sitting just beside them. It could be a family member, it could be a friend. When they are doing their assessment, that person can be helping. So Mr. Lo, What are the possible solutions to this issue?
Well, hello everyone. As we should go down the list of 7 issues, I'll be addressing some of the possible strategies that we can use to overcome some of these issues. For the first issue, academic misconduct, there are a number of things we can do. The first one is to shorten the duration of the assessment. For example, if you originally planned a final exam of 3 hours, you probably don't want to convert that into a 3-hour online assessment, because if the duration of time is long, it gives students more opportunities to commit academic misconduct. So we recommend you shorten the online assessment to about 1 hour each, or maybe a maximum of an hour, 30 minutes. And the second thing you can try out is to randomize the order of the questions. That means for some students, they get the questions listed in a particular order, and another student will get it listed in another order. The third one is to randomize the order of the answer choices. That will be for MCQs and multiple answer questions. You randomize the order of the distractors and possible choices. One that's not listed on the slide is that you can also present the question one by one instead of all together. This would also limit the ability of students to cheat. The next one, having different sets of questions. You can either do this manually, that means you create multiple sets of assessments with different set of questions, or you can use a platform that will generate that for you, whereby they can select random questions from a pool of questions. If you go with this method, you need to ensure that the resulting assessment is still assessing the same intended learning outcomes. All right. Okay, the next one, to avoid questions where answers can be easily found in textbooks or on intranet. If your online assessments are done with questions, especially close-ended questions, or questions where answers can come from your notes or textbooks, then it opens up possibilities for the students to cheat easily. So the recommendation is try to have more open-ended questions, question assessing their higher order thinking skills, so that you expect to see different answers from different students. The other possibility is to get your students to understand that assessments are for their own good and preparation for the next level of studies. So if they cheat in a particular assessment and they pass, it's not going to do them any good, because then they're going to suffer in the following semester. So this is something that you should try to instill in your students during the semester. The next one is about using security software. This refers to assessment system, online system, that can actually impose certain restrictions on the students when they take the assessments. The more expensive ones allow the computer to actually be locked. That is, the students can only take the assessments and they cannot do anything else. They cannot open up a browser, they cannot open Word, they cannot do anything except take the exam from start till the end. Some also will record the whole session using the webcam and the microphone of the laptop to record the whole session so that the student is in view. This recording can then be processed and analyzed by AI, and the report will be generated for the teacher. Yeah. This will be a more foolproof way to ensure the students don't cheat, because the recording will show you whether the students are moving, using their handphones, or are actually diligently taking the assessments. Okay, so that's about it for the possible suggestions on how to deal with this difficult issue of academic misconduct. But it really boils down to what I mentioned earlier, which is to instill upon the students that sense of academic integrity, and also for them to understand that if they cheat, it's going to do them more harm, because then they cannot make good progress in the following semesters. A last word is that we should also put down instructions to warn students about the consequences of academic misconduct during online assessments. This can be in the cover page of your exam, of your online exam, and also it can be read out by the teacher at the start of the assessment. Okay, back to you, Michelle.
Right, thank you, Mr. Low. Now we'll look at the second issue here. Right. The second one is on time. Well, like I've mentioned earlier just now, we cannot simply just take a paper, an exam paper, and then turn it online and expect students to complete it in 3 hours. The reason is because when we are doing assessments online, it can really be very taxing to be staring at the computer screen for a long period of time. So it's even worse actually if let's say the students are accessing the assessment through a mobile phone, a mobile device where the screen is even smaller. In addition to that, there might also be issues of time zone differences. This happens when some international students may have returned to their home country before the restrictions started or before the lockdown. As such, there might be some time difference. It could be a few hours, and you probably are scheduling an assessment Malaysian time, daytime. However, the students are actually back in their home country and they are actually, probably doing your test in the middle of the night. So that could be kind of an inconvenience for the students. So Mr. Law, what do you suggest we do with this matter then?
I was in the midst of answering a question from one of the audience. All right, with regards to the issue of time, as my colleague Michelle mentioned, it's not very good to put an assessment online that's 3 hours or worse still, even 4 hours. So again, one of the recommendations is to break down your assessment into multiple shorter assessments. So for example, if you have an assessment that's 3 hours long, you could break it down into 3 separate shorter assessments, each one being 1 hour, and then conduct the 3 assessments at different times, maybe one in the morning, one in the afternoon, and the third on the following day. Or you want to do them all one after another, you could do that, or make sure you give the students a short break. The other question really has to do with how do you ensure that the assessment actually starts on time? When you're doing an in-class assessment, you're invigilating the exam, you say, all right, the exam starts right now after you look at your watch. But in online assessments, you can't quite do that. So you have to ensure that whatever system you use, whether it's a LMS learning management system or some other platform, you have to make sure that the time, the starting of the time and the end of the assessment is properly done. That means it is very crucial for the teacher to be present during the whole duration of the assessment. Don't assume that the system is going to start the assessment on time and end it on time. So the teacher should be present before the assessment actually starts to ensure that the assessment actually starts and that students are taking it, and also ensure that it ends properly. With regards to the time zone, for time zones which are fairly close, for example, Hong Kong, Malaysia, and Australia, where the difference is only 2 hours, then the possibility of conducting a synchronous assessment is okay, because you can do one, say, it's 11 a.m. in Australia and 9 a.m. in Hong Kong and 9 a.m. in Malaysia. But if the geography location is very far, for example, New York, where it's a 12-hour span from over here, then it'll be quite difficult to do one in the morning and one at 9 p.m., right? So you probably might want to find the best compromise time between the 2 time zones, would be what we can suggest. But the worst come to worst, if it's really not possible for those situations, then you will have to consider having 2 separate assessments. They'll be taken hopefully in short separation of time, but ensure that both these assessments are measuring the same set of learning outcomes. Okay, back to you, Michelle.
Right. So now we look at the third issue, that's technology. Technology has been good and has been bad, and this is really a tricky one. Be it synchronous or asynchronous assessment, there is a digital divide between the ones who have it and the ones who probably have less, I would say. So this not only happen between among students, but also among lecturers and teachers. So what do we mean by digital divide here is the availability of hardware. Do your students have computers or laptop? tablet or smartphones? And even if they have such hardware, are they sufficient to support the requirements of the assessments, the platform that you're using? Can it be supported by the devices that your students are having? Some students may be having devices with low specifications, so therefore they may not be able to use that particular app that you have put your assessment in. In addition to that, we also have issues of connectivity and bandwidth. This is really subjected to one's locations geographically. Some areas you may have better and more stable connection, while some others may not. And then we also have the issue of whether Wi-Fi is available or not for the students. Some may not have Wi-Fi at their location, and they depend highly on their data. So they could be having limited data then, and would that be sufficient enough for them to complete the assessment that you have set? Well, the next one is on server disruption. This is really, well, I think sometimes kind of like a luck thing. So you can have everything ready and everything good set up properly, but somehow coincidentally on that day, just bad luck, the server may experience some kind of disruption, and therefore your synchronous assessment cannot be carried out. So Mr. Loh, how do we overcome this issue then?
All right. First thing first, lecturers, teachers, you need to find out from your students what they have or don't have in terms of hardware and bandwidth. That is, from the beginning of the semester, try to find out from your students whether they're using handphones, laptops, what kind of hardware specifications they have in their devices. Do they have good Wi-Fi at home? Are they using data plans? You need to know all that, because whether you end up using synchronous or asynchronous may to depend on what kind of students you have, and what kind of hardware they have, right? So you should find out. So that's the first thing you really need to do. Now, once you have sorted that out and you discover that maybe 90% of your students can do synchronous assessments and 10% may not be able to do it successfully, then you can plan for synchronous assessments for the 90% of the students, and then plan a more customized version for those that may not be able to sit for a 1-hour assessment. So a customized version might be a phone, oral interview, or some other means. So again, you need to really look at all this and see what portion of your assessments can be asynchronous or synchronous based on what students have. The other suggestion is to try to find and use a platform, an assessment platform that doesn't require high bandwidth. For example, you could use Google Forms to conduct your assessments, and the bandwidth is much lower compared to using some kind of proprietary software. And back to what we were saying earlier, if there is going to be a disruption, the teacher needs to know what to do. So the teacher has to be present during the synchronous assessment throughout the whole duration of it, and actually have a backup plan. Always plan for the worst. What happens if in the middle of the assessment, the server actually is disrupted? The important thing for you is to make sure you are able to communicate immediately to all your students, either using WhatsApp group, Instagram, email. That's for you to decide. But you must have a backup plan of what you need to do, and most importantly, a plan on how to communicate with them immediately should there be a major disruption during the synchronous assessment. All right, back to you, Michelle.
Okay. So moving on to the fourth issue, this is on reading and writing. Well, this can be on synchronous or asynchronous assessments. But for reading, it's more on synchronous assessments. Like I've mentioned before, it can be very strenuous for the eyes to be reading especially if it's a long text that a student needs to read in order to answer some questions. And worse is if it's on a small screen. And reading on the screen can take a longer time. So we really have to consider then, perhaps back to our second issue on time. In terms of writing, it will be challenging for those who need to do some mathematical problem solving. Writing symbols, drawing diagrams, formulas, and graphs, all these are pretty challenging if we are doing it online. Also, when we are typing, the frequency of typos, I'm sure you know, is much higher. And for some, maybe your thoughts may not flow as well when you are writing. So, Mr. Low, what should we do about this?
All right, before I address your issue, Michelle, a number of questions posted by the audience. Maybe we'll just answer them. One of them is asking what are the possible security software out there that can be used to post assessments with security features. As I responded to one that I know that's free right now is Respondents, and they have the lockdown browser facility. They also have the webcam recording facility. They are used quite a lot. More than 1,000 universities are using them. Proctor U is another one that you can use. It also has a webcam recording. This one's a bit expensive. There's one that is free called Easy LMS and Quizmaker. Well, they are both free and paid versions. And one that's used is a major one in Sweden. It's called exam.net. There's another one called ExamSoft. So I would suggest you take a look at some of this because unfortunately some of them are quite expensive. So I mean, if you want a system that can actually lock the browser and record the whole session, you will have to pay for it. Respondents is free right now because of the pandemic. They've opened it and made it free till end of the year. But after that, you'll have to pay for it. I think there's a question that asks whether we can use WhatsApp as a form of online assessment. I'll take this question, Michelle, and later I'll let you take the other question. Whether you use a particular tool for assessment boils down to a number of questions. One is, the most important is this instrument suited for the assessment of the learning outcome? Because we are all talking about assessments of the intended learning outcome. So WhatsApp is just a means of communication. If you think it's a suitable means of communication to assess your intended learning outcome, then yes, it can be. It's using WhatsApp is not different than using email or using a chat software. So I hope that answers your question. Of course, the other thing you want to look at is the issue of cheating. So if you use WhatsApp, clearly it's a bit easier for students to communicate with one another. Right? Okay, what was your issue we're talking about, Michelle? Let's see. It's
reading and writing.
Yeah.
Yes.
So sorry about that. Reading and writing. This is actually a big issue which sometimes we don't realize, that taking an assessment online is very different than taking a paper-based assessment. Because I think we all know reading from the screen, whether it's big or small screens, on the smart handphones that students tend to like to use, is vastly different from reading from paper. And more significantly, writing is even worse. Writing with a pen on paper is quite smooth. It's natural for us. Typing is quite difficult, especially trying to type formulas and symbols, mathematical symbols. So the first thing we need to recognize is that reading and writing will take extra time because it is online. It's a bit more difficult for students to read, for them to scan questions or to go back to questions. If I'm taking a paper-based exam, it's easy for me to flip the pages to get to the question. Online is a bit more difficult to scroll. Writing is the bigger one, is the bigger culprit. Typing is not as easy as writing, and especially with all the typos. So there's also the consideration of the technological savviness of the students. You may have some students which are IT savvy, they program a lot, they use computers a lot, and they can type quite fast, while some may not type so fast. So then you should, our recommendation is to give students an additional amount of time, factor that into your exam duration. So for example, if the exam is originally 1 hour, you may want to expand that into 1 hour 10 minutes or 1 hour 15 minutes because of these two issues of reading and writing. Another thing you can try is to separate out your cover page that contains all the instructions, because sometimes reading the instructions themselves on the cover page is going to take a certain amount of time. So you can maybe separate that as a pre-assessment reading. Now, in terms of writing solutions that requires drawing, illustrations, or mathematical formulas, the recommendation, of course, is just to ask students to use a black pen and produce their answers on a white piece of paper, and use their handphone and take a snap image of their answers and upload it to the assessment platform. The other thing you can consider is, how about alternative assessments? Maybe I shouldn't use synchronous online assessments. I should use other forms of assessments. So that's something you should consider. And lastly, which I think is something that's big, if you are going to do synchronous assessments, I highly, highly recommend this, especially if it is the first time the students are taking. Have a mock assessment. Do a mock assessment with them, maybe say 1 week before the actual assessment. Do a mock assessments where they actually try out a mock assessment, starting the assessment, doing maybe a couple of mock questions, submitting, and ending the assessments. Because, you know, clicking the start button or clicking the end button comes with some consequences which the students need to be aware of. So highly suggest that a mock assessment be done. And if you cannot do the mock assessments, then compromise would be to record some videos on how to take the assessments. That means record your LMS or the platform that you're using and show them which button they have to click, which pull down they have to drop, and all that stuff, and post it online so that students are at least fairly familiar with the test-taking mechanism before they actually sit for the synchronous online assessment. All right, back to you.
Okay, next, the issue I'd like to highlight is on feedback and marking. So this is for both synchronous and also asynchronous assessments. Any teachers and lecturers here, I'm sure you'd agree with me, it's so much easier to use paper and pen to do marking and to provide feedback. I totally agree that it's really tedious to mark on screen. It's not only taxing on my eyes, it's just so difficult to write your comments, to highlight your students' error, and it's just so tiring, I would think. So then, this really boils down to the question, how can we provide feedback effectively to students then, Mr. Loh?
Okay, again, before I get back to this issue, I do see more questions coming in. For those of you who are posting your questions, thank you very much and continue to do that. But if we don't have time to answer them right now, because we are both speaking and focused on speaking, please ask them towards the end, because we'll allocate maybe about 10 minutes at the end to do Q&A. So any questions which we did not get to answer, please ask them again towards the end, and we'll try to answer them for you, all right? Thank you. Okay, back to the questions of feedback and marking. This is probably one of the most difficult things to do in my assessments, especially providing feedback. Marking itself is also not easy. The suggestion is to choose the platform appropriately. Make sure the platform that you select allows you to give commentary. Means if you select a particular platform to host the synchronous assessments or even asynchronous assessments, make sure that platform allows you to give feedback. You can type the feedback. There's a box where you type the feedback, or some other mechanisms to give feedback. The feedback can also be given in an audio format. You could record voice feedback, even though that could be a little bit tedious. One possibility, of course, is to do group feedback. If you have 80 students in some kind of compulsory subject, and to give feedback to 80 students might be a problem. If you have to type it online, it can be quite tedious. You might then want to group your feedback together into different categories. For example, a category of the feedback could be on organization of the points. Another one could be the grammar, the language, grammar of the language they use. Or a third one could be on introduction. So you group them according to some categories and then present the feedback as one, post it to the students or address it in your class. So this would definitely allow students to understand and learn better from their assessments. Marking is almost very similar to feedback. On paper, you can mark easily with the pen, with the red pen, you just write some things. Online, it's quite difficult to do that. Some people might want to take a book on the side and jot it down as they mark, but also quite tedious. So it falls back to exactly the same thing as what I said earlier about giving commentary, because marking is actually just giving commentary and marks. So choose the platform appropriately, one that allows you to give comments, feedback, so that marking can be done easily. If the students are submitting assessments, papers into Turnitin supports the provision of feedback by the teachers, so you could use that also. Okay, Michelle, I'll turn it back to you for the next issues.
Right, for some of us who are teaching courses where we are required to evaluate soft skills, courses can be like professional development courses or some other holistic courses that you will evaluate leadership skills or team skills. This could be really difficult to evaluate when we are turning into online assessments due to the lack of interaction, face-to-face interaction with the students. And because of this lack of face-to-face interaction with the students, we are not able to actually observe them in real time, how they behave in a certain situation, how do they manage their time, how do they work together as a team, how do they resolve conflicts when they arise, what about their work ethics, how do we observe their work ethics, what about interpersonal skills and communication skills. So it's really, really difficult. Some of us really have difficulties trying to think of a best solution. So Mr. Low, what do you suggest for this one?
Evaluating soft skills. So as my colleague Michelle was trying to emphasize, using online assessments to evaluate soft skills it's not really ideal, but there are definitely possibilities. The most obvious and probably the best would be to get students to do video recording. Ask them to record on video what they do. If you are evaluating soft skills, ask them to capture their behavior, their interaction amongst students and with other communities maybe. Very importantly, make sure you inform the students, perhaps in your assessment brief, what exactly you're looking for in the video. Because if you don't tell them what you're looking for in the video, they could be recording a lot of things for you, but they may not get any marks. So you must inform the students exactly what you're looking for in the video. And of course, those things have to be aligned to the intended learning outcomes. So we suggest maybe even publishing your marking rubric to the student, or at least the criteria you're going to use to assess those learning outcomes. They should be published to the students so that the students can know now what they should do when they record the video, or this what segments of the video they should edit, what they should put in, and what they don't have to put in. Because to record student behavior, It's not something that students just do once for an hour, record it and submit to you. Because if you evaluate students just on a 1 hour snapshot of what they do, it's probably not very accurate of what they have learned or accomplished. So for video recording to evaluate soft skills, you really want them to do multiple videos throughout the semester. Say if it's the 12-week semester, you might want one at week 3, another maybe at week 7, and maybe one towards the end of the semester. In all of those, make sure you tell the students what is it you're looking for. We're looking to evaluate your teamwork skills. We're looking to evaluate your teamwork skills, and this is what we're looking for in teamwork. Or we are looking to evaluate your leadership skills, and this is what we're looking for. Of course, you got to be very careful how you say that, because students may then just act out those roles, make sure they get the marks. So you have to also be a bit smart when you watch those videos to see whether it's acted or it's not. So, which is why it's important to get multiple videos from them and to see how they interact with other people. The other thing you can do, in addition to videos, is to ask them to submit a reflection essay or reflection report. So the reflection essay would complement the video recording, and the reflection essay, you could ask them things about, what they have learned, lessons learned, and so forth. Okay, back to you, Michelle.
Okay, so our final issue, one that we face, is on submission limitation. This is where we consider the submission of real product in an online manner. There are some courses which require students to submit a product or a prototype. For example, in architecture, students will probably need to submit models of buildings that they have made. For engineering students, they might need to submit a prototype or circuit boards. And for culinary, just like what you see on the slide here, they need to submit their cooking, their dishes or the meals that they have prepared. So this can be a very challenging one where we really have to think hard. How do we ensure students can still submit a product or a prototype online? So Mr. Low, what do you think?
Well, submission limitation generally comes with asynchronous assessments, where, as Michelle pointed out, we are not able to receive actual products from students because we're not, because of the social distancing, we're not allowed to see them. Right? So it becomes a challenge. The thing to do again is to use video recording. The obvious thing to do is to use video recording. But now, for this kind of video recording, the student is more of demonstrating the process of them developing the product or prototype. Whilst earlier is on behavior. So again, you need to make clear to the students, we want to see how you develop the process, how you develop the product. So the video recording should show a demonstration of how they develop the product and also the final product itself. So you will probably require the students to narrate the video. And as they are doing the demonstration of developing the prototype, they should narrate. And as they demonstrate the final product to you, for example, the model of the building in an architectural class, they need to narrate so they understand what the product is. If you're looking for innovation in the products, make sure you tell the students you're looking for innovation in the product. And as before, you may also want to complement this using a reflection report, where students will write about the challenges they face during the process of developing the product, how they overcome those challenges, and what are the lessons learned. Okay, that will be what I have for submission limitation. Over to you, Michelle.
Okay, Mr. Low, we actually have finished talking about the 7 main challenges that we have faced in terms of running online assessments and what are some of the possible solutions that we have taken to reduce whatever limitations that we have. So we still have some time now. Let's look at the Q&A questions that we have there so that we can address them. So there is one question that says, any particular security software for preventing cheating? I think that really depends on what kind of cheating that you mentioned here.
So I think
you have already answered that. Okay, great.
There are quite a few available that actually locks down the computer and video records what you have. One is Respondents, which is actually free right now until end of the year because of the pandemic. Proctor U also does that. Another one called ExamSoft also does that. ExamSoft has a trained professional that actually looks at the video record. The AI will actually look at the video recording first and flag suspicious video recordings to the trained professional that will then watch the video recording of the student taking the assessments to determine whether there's any alleged misconduct. Then the report is actually sent to the teacher on completion of their analysis. But as I mentioned earlier, these are mostly commercial products and some are quite costly.
Okay, I think there is a request for you to list down in the Q&A panel there, the various tools that you have mentioned.
Okay. I'll type it in, I guess.
Okay, so that everyone can actually have a look at it.
Why don't you take the next question while I type it in?
There's one question here by Wendy. Any suggestions on tools that support peer review or peer marking? Mr. Low, is there any such tool that you know of?
For peer marking, actually, none of these tools, or you can say none of them or all of them supports marking, right? So peer marking, the platform that you use, for example, if you're going to use Padlets for students to submit things, then they can use that to mark also. Right? I'm not aware of any particular software that's geared solely for peer marking. But as I mentioned, peer marking is nothing more than just marking what your peers have done. So a lot of these tools that you use for students to do their assessments can be turned into peer marking as long as the answers can be circulated among the students.
Okay, right. And then there is the next question that says, can Canvas do this in the future? I'm pretty sure that's from our colleague here. Hopefully, we can look into this in the near future. I think there are a number of similar questions asking about the security software.
It seems that most of the questions are centered around security software and academic misconduct. Yes, that is a major issue for synchronous assessment. But I want to emphasize that there are a lot of other issues that we need to recognize also, besides just this academic misconduct thing. I'm looking at a question from Javier Ferrari. I hope I pronounced your name correctly, Javier Ferrari, talking about the security software that locks down the browser. When the browser is locked down, assuming it also has the webcam recording feature, it records what the student is doing. So even though if the student has another device, if the student's hands move to the next device, or the student picks up his or her handphone, the video record will capture that. So that will be that can be used as evidence for academic misconduct. So clearly, if you use those kind of software, you need to give instructions to the students to tell them that they're going to be recorded, voice recorded and video recorded, and that the students should not move from their seat. They should only be typing on the computer that they're using and the mouse. You'll probably noticed that we have actually talked about 7 issues related to online assessments, challenges related to online assessments. And we are looking from the point of view of these issues. Yeah, there are a lot of other issues and other areas of challenges in online assessments. One, of course, is regarding the, how do you deal with validity and reliability of your assessment when you move it online? So that's a whole new ballgame, and we've not covered a lot of that. But you notice also that a lot of these issues are actually related. For example, the one on time and the one on technology, they are quite related. Time, reading, writing, they're also related. Some of the suggested solutions or strategies can be used to solve a number of these issues. For example, the question of reliability, using security software to prevent cheating is one of them. Question of validity. So the question of validity really boils down to the teacher ensuring that your assessment questions assessing what you intend to measure, which is namely the intended learning outcome. So on validity, it comes down a lot to the onus is a lot on the teacher. Okay, are there any other questions? Let's see. Will Pinocto be included in the future? Included in where? Can you rephrase your question, Vanessa Sebastian? While you rephrase your question, I see another question from Saravanan Arumugan. Thanks for your question and good evening. The question says, can essay questions be considered for online assessments? Of course. Well, one of the things we don't talk about today, are the other dimensions of online assessments. We only look at the challenges. When you create and design your assessments, you really have to look at the whole set, the whole repertoire of questions, types of questions available to you to use. There's really no limitation to say that this set of questions that I use on paper exams cannot be used online, because anything that you can type or create online can become a valid question. So definitely use essay questions. As we were saying earlier, we do encourage the use of essay questions, open-ended questions, to hopefully reduce the risk of academic misconduct. So I hope that answers your question. Yes, definitely you can use essay questions, and it's also recommended.
I think in addition to that is higher order thinking questions here.
Yeah.
So Vanessa has rephrased the question.
Okay, I'm going to type the list of security software for you all now while Michelle addresses all those questions.
Okay, so Vanessa's question is, will Panopto be included as a plugin in Canvas in the future? Well, that really depends on your institution, whether they would want to invest in this particular plugin or not. Is there any other questions from the audience? We will wait for a moment for Mr. Loh to type in the list of tools that he has mentioned?
I'm typing it in the chat box instead of the Q&A box.
Okay.
Everybody can see it.
Okay, so please refer to the
first
chat
three that I
box.
typed, those three provides security, locking down, and webcam. Some of the others that I'm going to provide now are only assessment platforms, and they do not provide the webcam facility of recording the exams. Exam.net is appears to be quite a well-established one. It's meets the Swedish educational requirements. And the last two I'm going to type are actually free. Well, they have free versions and paid versions. Okay, I'm done. I'm done, Michelle.
I'm sorry, Mr. Low, but I don't see your answer in the chat box.
I sent it to all attendees, so maybe you don't see it as a panelist.
Okay, all right, good. Just to make sure that the answers are sent out. Okay, there is another question by Xiao San Cheng. Compared to physical class, does online lesson require longer learning time to complete the syllabus? Okay.
It's talking about online delivery now.
Yeah, it's about online delivery.
Go and address it, it's fine.
Okay, right. I think it really depends firstly on your content, what you are actually delivering, what course is it, because there are really like so many different things that we are teaching online. It can be teaching language, it can be teaching mathematics, it can be what you call applied kind of skill kind of course, learning how to sew or cook. So again, it goes back then to how you design your lessons. What is your lesson plan? And what are your learning outcomes for that particular course? Whether it requires a longer time to learn, it also depends on your learners. How motivated are they to complete the course online? So how motivated they can be, it's kind of then go back to the design of your course. How do you engage them? Perhaps that would be our next series here.
Yeah, just to add a little bit to that, whether online lessons require longer time to cover the syllabus really depends on the teacher. It can take more time, same amount of time, or less time. So the key is how are you going to transform your in-class lessons to online lessons so that students are motivated to learn? That is the key. So you really have to think how you can redesign your lessons, synchronous lessons, and asynchronous materials you post online, lecture notes, formative assessments, discussion forums, videos annotated, and so forth. How are you going to combine all those things to make sure students learn or even learn better? Now that you do online, you can also do flipped classrooms where you have some materials posted online where students have to read and maybe have a little bit of activity to do before they come to your class, so you can even cover more. So again, to answer your question, it really boils down to how you redesign your teaching to suit the online mode.
Okay, and there's one last question, I think, from Miss Evelyn Uy. How about Math online assessment? Any platform?
I'm not aware of any platform that's specifically geared for additional mathematics. I can imagine the difficulty would be entering all the symbols for the students. So one of the things, of course, you can do is just to ask the students to use paper and pen and take a snapshot and upload it. Which is why the mock assessment is very important, because you want to give the students an opportunity to try it out first before, rather than panicking during the assessments when you're trying to take the photograph and uploading and all things go wrong. So it's good to have a mock assessments for that.
Okay. All right. So it seems that our time is almost up. We've come to the end of this webinar already. Thank you very much for your time and participation. Thank you for all your questions. If I've missed out any in between, we'll definitely get to you through email. We truly appreciate your presence here with us this Friday afternoon. Our next part of this webinar is on next Thursday. This session is on modified flipped classroom, something that Mr. Low mentioned just now. So for those who are interested to think about how you can design your lessons better online, you probably want to drop by and attend this webinar next Thursday. So please scan the QR code there to register. All right, now I'd like to pass the mic back to Mr. Low for his closing remarks.
Thank you, Michelle. Firstly, I'd like to thank everyone for taking the time to participate in this webinar. I really hope that the information and sharing that we did today in some ways have been useful to you all. There are three main takeaways from this webinar that I want to highlight right now. Number one is that we as teachers need to be aware of the issues that come with online assessments. We need to be aware of those issues, and we highlighted a number of them today. The second takeaway is that these issues need to be carefully considered when we select and design our online assessments, including whether the assessments should be synchronous or asynchronous. So one is you have to be aware of the issues. Number two is make sure you have these issues in your mind when you select and design your assessments. And lastly, the third takeaway is, and the most important one of all, is that we need to recognize that there's no silver bullet to kill the werewolf, so to speak. There is no single absolute solution to resolve any of this issue in an absolute way. What we can do and do successfully is to come up with ways of reducing and mitigating the risk associated with the issues and challenges that we talked about today. So if we can do that continually and effectively, then I believe we would have done justice to our students. So with that, I thank you all for coming, and I wish you all a wonderful weekend. Thank you.
All right. Happy weekend and stay safe. Bye-bye.
Bye.